Roy, Mr. Diggs.
Okay, the time being 7:33, I'd like to open this session of the Chelmsford School Committee. Let's begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome. This meeting's being recorded and televised by Chelmsford Telemedia. If there's anyone else present who's planning to record, would you please so notify us at this time? Thank you very much. The only item on the agenda is a discussion of the budget, so I will open that discussion. You should have received via email a note from the assistant superintendent, I believe, outlining some developments with full-day kindergarten. I think that might be a good place to start. There's going to be a little bit of a circular discussion, so I'll let us go kind of where the committee wants to go on this. But if we start with the kindergarten piece, maybe it helps as a jumping off point for discussion of the overall situation.
Want me to start?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I wasn't quite sure. So I ended up talking to the DESE last Friday, the 8th. They had called because we had applied for the 702 transition to kindergarten grant, and they wanted to know if we were still interested in taking the grant, because when they looked at, I changed the document a little bit to reflect this year, but they wanted to make sure that the transportation issue that we ran into last year and what we were doing with kindergarten, that it wasn't going to be given back to them, because there are other towns that are obviously vying for this money, and they'd like to, it's a lot easier for them to give it to them in the first place. So I said, let me make some phone calls, let me have some conversations, and I will get back to you. So at that time, obviously, I alerted Dr. Tiano, let him know the situation, and at that point, we thought it would be a good idea to contact Mr. Rigney, and I explained the situation to him as well. So what happens with this grant is this grant sets you up for a second grant. So this grant right now is written for $170,000. Now, last year, same grant was written. It was written for $160,000, and $40,000 was awarded to the district, which was given back at that time. When I pressed a little bit further with the DESE, I said, okay, that's great. I know that last year we received $40,000. What are we looking at this year? You may not be able to give me a total amount. The response was, it's significantly higher than what you received last year, up to interpretation. Great news. So obviously I gave that information out, and you have it in your report. So what that does is, if we were to receive that grant and take that monies and we're moving forward with kindergarten, it sets you up for the 701 grant, which is the quality full-day grant. Now, what happens with that, and I learned a lot of information from talking from the DOE, they said that what will happen is in May or June, the RFP will come out for that grant. You will apply for it. You have until August to apply for the grant, and then the awards will be given based on the House and the Senate budget. If those are in alignment, then they'll be able to tell you what the allotments are. If they're not in alignment, they'll send out the RFP pending a certain amount of money, and so that you don't have to go back and amend the grant. I don't know what that monies is. I did send to all of you what was awarded to the districts for this year that are receiving that grant. Looked at a couple of comparables, Arlington, Franklin, some towns that are like us, and it was a significant amount of money. So that's where we are at this point. So the grant is there. We should hear, it goes to the commissioner pretty soon. Then it goes back to the EOE for a final approval, and we should know by December if we receive that grant or not, and how much that significant amount is.
So last year, we applied for the grant, we got it, and we gave it back.
Correct.
What's the disadvantage of applying for it? And if for whatever reason, because we still have a few things that are some loose ends that have to be tied in the next couple of weeks, what's the disadvantage for us to apply for it? And then if for whatever reason, because budget-wise, we can't make it happen, we just give it back. Is there a disadvantage to that?
I don't know. I didn't ask that question because she didn't press that question. However, I can't imagine how, well, first of all, we've applied for the grant. The grant is already in. We're just waiting for what the award is. So at this point, we would, obviously move forward. There is no disadvantage of giving it back except for other districts are trying to make their planning. So it's just trying to decide what's the best thing. Now, I've called them back at this point and said that we're moving forward with this grant. So we're waiting. However, if things change, I could always call them ahead of time if the awards aren't coming out until December.
And I think we need to have a discussion about it tonight. Just how serious are we about going after this?
Well, we're one of fewer than 10 communities that does not provide full-day kindergarten in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That train is coming down, whether we want to recognize it or not. We are going to, at some point, be required to provide full-day kindergarten. If they're going to pay us to do that, then I think we take advantage of the opportunity to move forward with it.
Now, is this 170, if we got all of it, is that one-time money or recurring?
One-time money.
First
Now,
year.
the next one, is that recurring as in terms of sustainability?
One-time money.
What it would do is replenish some of the one-time monies that are being spent now.
Well, that's where I was going to go next.
And I think this is where we have to work our way into an understanding of what exactly the nature of the financial trouble is that we're in right now. I'd say that at a starting point, we need to distinguish between the FY14 problem and the FY15 problem. There's no doubt that we overspent in FY14, and that needs to be dealt with. I think the number is not quite as large as it appears, in the sense that because things were so disorganized, some of the bills didn't get paid in a timely manner and it left money behind. Essentially, there's $665,000 in the circuit breaker revolving account,
That we could have spent.
which should have been
Right.
expended last year.
Yeah,
So
instead of
that, so
putting,
that the total amount of the overrun is not really the 878. It's more like around 300,000, I think, when you look at what's left over of that overrun after spending the circuit breaker and also the amount of unpaid bills. So there's that problem. There's another apparent deficit in FY15. And in part, we've made some cuts to deal with that. And I think we need to discuss whether or not we think that's a real deficit. Let me say it a different way. Whether that's a deficit that's being generated by internal problems or by external problems. And frankly, we have to talk about whether or not we got enough money from the town last year based on the energy costs.
I think there's a variety of questions besides just focusing on that one piece. If you want to address the reduction in terms of utilities, then we have to go into it a little bit more in detail, and also that if we know that that's a line item that we're not going to see the savings, that the town manager would make up the difference. We just have to ask.
And the
I
town
don't think
manager has indicated an appreciation of that fact. In short, we are showing a deficit of about $558,000, and we were short on our increase last year by $750,000.
723 to be exact.
723.
Right, but
okay. Now, I think reasonable people can have discussions about whether all of that should be returned, or if there have been some energy savings. The short version, though, is that the apparent deficit that we see in FY15, after we make the cuts that we've made, is very similar in size to the amount of money that we didn't receive that was projected for us to realize energy savings.
Right, but when you look at the energy saving, it's that line item. So if you had that money in your budget, it's on that line item. It just
Yeah.
means that we would have had that money, if there was energy savings, to be put somewhere else.
And we wouldn't be in a deficit situation for FY15.
If we were going to transfer it.
Right.
But if we had if we didn't have the savings, if there were no savings, then that money still sits in that line item until we move it somewhere.
Right,
And
but-
we
but-
would move it, so.
Yeah, but here's the thing, too. We have to remember this. We technically did not set the end item dollar value budget. We got $50 million, and then we have to back it into our budget.
I
That's how it's
understand
always
that.
been.
We've
So
been saying that
so
all
really,
along.
so that's part of it. But from what I heard from the discussion at the Board of Selectmen meeting, that really concerned me, to add to Mike, there's two things. The first item is, and I'll get to the ESCO part second. The first item is, this is not, the discussion on kindergarten is not a one-year thing. It's not just FY15. We have to look at 16 and 17, because that absorption of money goes over a couple-of-year period.
Right.
Okay? And I don't think the grant allows you to carry money from year to year. You
No,
understand?
but where.
Well, no, you said that you said it'd
where
be
we-
like school choice.
No,
Right.
it would allow us to retain a balance in school choice.
Correct. Exactly. So, but that first year is a small balance. It's not it's
Agreed.
213,000. But, so we have to look at it really, not FY 15, but also FY 16 and 17. So we need to be.
But yeah, before we plunge into it,
But we also have to know what the budget is and what the costs are, and then if there's, sped students that there may be there, that there's a factor in dealing with the total amount of the budget in order to implement the plan. I haven't seen all of that information as far as full-day kindergarten goes.
I'm not sure you're gonna before December. That's what I'm pushing for here, is that I think we
can I
need
finish?
to give some guidance before we get too far down the road. On the one hand, yeah, maybe there's no legal trouble if we reject a grant. But let's be honest, it'll cause some irritation. They called us to ask for a reason, right?
We're
We have to-
concerned about irritating them.
I'd like to get if we're not gonna pursue the grant this year, I don't wanna damage our chances for pursuing it next year.
I think at some point, they're going to just say, Chelmsford, you win. You know what I mean? We're going to be the lone community that doesn't provide full-day kindergarten. And, at some point, we have to recognize the cost of providing that is not going to go down every year. It's just going to go up. And at some point, we just have to say, we recognize our obligation, and we've got to do it.
Okay, so let me finish what I was trying to say. In looking at the ESCO, right, we take our budget increased by 1.5% year to year, from last year to this year, 1.5. Okay, if you put the ESCO money back in, it's a 3.15 increase. The thing is if you go back to 1.5 next year, if it plays correctly, our increase is going to be 3.15, 3%, the average that it's been over the last 10 years, okay? But it's 3.15 on 50 million versus 3.15 on $50.7 million. So it's really, I'll call it a recurring loss for us as a district, okay? So that's one of the things we need to think about. That's why when I talk about FY16, that's where an impact can be, okay? To the positive, if the money is put back into our budget, okay? That's how we have to determine if we can handle or move forward with full-day kindergarten. We can't just say, oh, yeah, we can move on a one-year basis. We have to look at incrementally going out, because some of the other things that we want to do have to all fall into play, because
We have to be able to sustain the programs, whether they're the ones we currently have or the ones we want to implement. But you need to know what the full financial impact will be as far as the full-day kindergarten, if that can happen within the next 4 weeks, if there's something that can magically occur here. I mean, you know what staff would be, what the average and the range would be, and a variety of other things.
we have numbers. We have numbers that we determined were going to be set-aside numbers from our portion of the budget every year for the next 4 to 5 years. Okay, we need to, I don't have it with me. we need to determine what that is, okay, for the next, exactly what the number is for the next 4 or 5 years. Dr. Tiano, I think you have that somewhere.
That's, right, we've not relooked at those numbers in the last, probably in the last 2 months,
Right.
in terms of that. We started kindergarten work in September.
Right.
And obviously, we've been sidetracked since, but we could go back. We need to make sure those
if you-
numbers are.
When you say
Real.
set aside, you mean set aside, that
Budget.
we mean to
Budget.
spend down
Budget.
from?
No,
Okay.
but it's the budget. This is what we budgeted for it. This is what was gonna
Right.
come out of our operational budget. This was gonna come out of some of our
Revolving.
revolving accounts.
Right.
And to see how that plays together, because
Right.
right now, we depleted our revolving account, okay?
Well,
And the only
that's-
funds, wait, let
Yeah.
me finish. The only funds that are gonna be going back into that revolving account is the monies that we're gonna collect this year, which could be set for FY. It's not enough, but could be a set for FY.
Well, if it were met with,
That's what I'm saying. So now, if we take a look at it, and we're saying that potentially, we have to take some estimates on what it's gonna be. Maybe we put 100K in there as an estimate on determining if we can do it or not. Maybe, and then the second grant, I don't know, I looked at that, the average number in there was anywhere between 125 and 225. So what, we put in 150, 160 to be safe, so we know we potentially gonna get that. So now we have a number we can play with, 260,000, plus the 230. But once that's the first year.
Right.
Now we have to look at what we're gonna have for school choice the next year, and will it be enough to fill the gap that I guarantee we have? And if not, then we can't pull that trigger. And I agree, listen, I want to see the full day K as well, but we need to be financially prudent here and make sure that whatever decision we make is the right
I
one,
agree with
because
you.
we
I'm
don't
just
want to affect staff
Stating the
anymore.
obvious, that the cost of providing this, which at some date.
Oh, it's never gonna go
sometime
down. That's
is
not gonna
going
go
to be
down.
a Required service
Yep.
is just going up every year.
Yep. And then it's gonna come out of our full operational budget, we're not
Absolutely.
gonna get any help from anybody.
Yep,
I won't argue with you.
okay.
You know, you can't challenge the state when they.
well, I
when
guess
they un-
I'm unclear on what kind of direction we're giving the administrative
I
team
guess
then.
we can't, listen, we can't be retort to, we need to make sure that all of our numbers are correct. We need to find out what our plan was to implement full day K financially, number one, okay? Then we need to find out how much we're gonna get. And we can't make the full day K until we know that number.
Absolutely.
Because if it's 40K, it's not gonna happen.
So what you're really saying is that the direction should be pursue the grant fully,
Yeah.
and we'll make a decision once we see the number.
And they
Yeah, because
can't
it's going to
expect that
come
we
down
would
to
act in
money.
any other way.
Yeah, you can't, how
It's
can
gonna
you?
come down to whether
In the
or not we can
meantime,
afford it.
Should we be reviewing the full day K
Yeah.
plan on our side?
Let's double check.
Yeah, to make sure the numbers are right and
correct.
accurate.
And how the original plan was, how we were gonna fulfill that plan, how we were gonna make that happen. And see if we, remember, there was money coming out of the operational budget, and then there was money coming
right.
out of, revolving accounts. The revolving account is something that we can control. Between that and grant money that's coming, that's how we need to make the determination.
And the other piece is that when we begin to build the FY16 budget, we'll have a clue as to whether or not it's actually going to be able to fit in there, because we're going to do this a little bit differently. That's where some of these policies come in place, and some of the other suggestions will come in place when you want to discuss it.
And Nick, just as a clarification, when you talk about the revolving funds as well as the operating budget, coming from the operating budget would be the addition we were requesting from the town.
the
in
town,
terms of-
correct.
So not from our
Right.
existing,
Correct.
taking from
Correct.
some other program.
Yeah, well, from the the monies that we estimated we're gonna need for next year. And we don't know if that's absolutely correct until Frank completes his entire review of the budget plan. So that's why we need that next 30 days or so, waiting for that determination, and then Frank to clear up, everything else, the hodgepodge of mess that he has on his hands that he's trying to fix, so.
So if you could just do that in 30 days.
I just wrote that down.
Feel free to begin at any time.
Well, okay. So I think it's about as clear as it's going to get there. You might want to just point out, if you have another discussion with Desi, that the money, the actual number is actually important to us this year, and we're not going to be able to make a good decision until we see that number, and we apologize for any inconvenience that causes people. but we have some other things we're dealing with.
Would you feel good if they came back and said, we're gonna give you 200K, and then, assuming you're gonna get at least another 150K later, that puts, pretty close to what we had estimated?
It really does. I mean,
Exactly.
I think at that point, we'd want to,
Because we were talking about
want to go
350,
forward.
so we were
It
talking
will
about
not
like
go
350
over the
right?
170. That's what we
Right.
requested. So they're not going to give us another.
But if it came in there-
Okay, I want to be clear.
I think,
170 would be a beautiful thing.
yeah, I think,
I agree.
I'll apologize to the public again, because this is a little bit of whiplash. I believe at our last regularly scheduled meeting, we decided that full-day K was off for
Right.
indefinite
But we
future.
didn't- but we
we've
didn't
got,
know
I
information.
just want to point out that there have been a couple of developments, right? The big one being that DESI, it looks like they might come through with more money than they did
Oh,
before.
a significant amount. more
And the
money.
other is our continuing discussion of what exactly the nature of our budget problem is. And as we work through those numbers, we have a little bit better feeling about what was a problem because of simple mismanagement, what was a problem because of the more complex problem of overruns, and what we think is going to be a recurring problem. And at this point, I'm not seeing a big recurring problem in FY15, given the steps we've taken. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's up
Only if we
to-
resolve the utility issue, yeah.
Well, there's maybe something else, but I mean, we can say that, but I'd rather hear that from the consultant, from the auditor, that as they come forward with their numbers, that they're confirming that. I mean, I can feel all warm and nice, okay, we're gonna get the money, we're gonna do this, but I mean, I don't wanna go in that direction, because that's not how I am. I need concrete numbers. I need to know from, outside sources that as they're looking at where we're going, that those numbers will work for us in FY15 of what it is that we need to do. And then we need to make sure that we have the appropriate red flags on the items, or the line items that we had before, and maybe a few other ones from what we learned at MASC in the Cape. And that way, then, if those triggers are in place, then we'll know soon enough that if we need to handle a problem, we have time to do it, rather than wait until after the fact.
Right. I'm saying that that's what I'm beginning to hear from what I'm seeing from the auditor and from Mr. Antonelli, that the size of our projected deficit in FY15 is of the same order of magnitude anyway, of the money that was removed from the budget
And the money that we're
in
requesting.
expectation of energy savings.
And the money that we're requesting. You have to take into consideration, we have a town meeting, we're
No,
requesting money.
that's what I'm saying.
I want it
We
clear.
are not, I'm trying to put that idea forward, that in fact, we are not requesting money from town meeting because of an internal problem with the budget for FY15. We are for an internal problem in FY14. No question about that. But in FY15, what we're really talking about is rebalancing the budget based on new developments in the energy contract. In short, that the solar power that was expected to drive a big reduction in our expenses hasn't been turned on. And now there's a proposal not to send it to the schools at all.
Well, it's
Which,
not just
again,
about sending it to the
If
schools.
it's going to make the town more money, I
That's
fully
fine.
support
Right.
that. That's the right way to do it. But we need to recognize that that's going to require a rebalancing of the school budget.
Right. If you listen to what Paul and Gary, and I forget the gentleman's name that was there, trying to describe what they're trying to do from an evaluation standpoint, as far as I'm concerned, if it goes to the schools, it's the same thing as it goes to the town. It's all one and the same as far as I'm concerned. And if we can get more money, it's more money. I mean,
Right.
that's great. So if it works, it's a great idea. And if it's the right investment, depending upon what you have to spend and how much you're getting back. The concern that I have from a budget standpoint is Paul was trying to explain, he was critical on trying to get a vote from the Board of Selectmen, because they need to move forward, because they still have to spend some time doing some engineering work, and then an additional 30 days, they have to, I think was part of the process of getting the purchase order out or the requisition out or something, and then an additional 60 days of construction And then there's obviously a turn-on period from getting the equipment turned on, and then you won't realize savings for the next bill, which is additional 30 days. Well, I added all that up. We're talking about April and May. So that means the panels will not be fully operational, and you won't even know if they'll be optimized until the April-May timeframe, which is 5/6 of the entire year gone. You can't realize $723,000 worth of savings in 2 months. It's not going to happen.
Well,
Right,
no-
but that's
well, I-
why in any discussion that
Right.
we've had with the town manager and any of us individually, that he has assured us that if the cost savings is not met, then that number comes back to us. And that's why I think that when we're looking at some of the warrant articles where he didn't support money going into all of them, is that money being held back is in case budgets need that as a result of not seeing the savings in a decreased energy cost. So that's how I'm looking at it, is that's where some of that money's going to come back into our budget, because it was on the premise that we would save money, and if he can see that it's not saving money, we're going to get it back.
Did we not, Frank, maybe you can help us with this. Did we not agree with the town that we were already putting in about $234,000, if I recall, into the budget for utilities because of this concern that we had at the tri-board meeting? Wasn't there a value of like 234?
It was higher than that, but we did agree that we were putting in additional funds for.
Right. Now, was that going to be realized through a quote-unquote budget increase? Or how does that?
That's part of the number, the 588 number, which is the number we're bringing to town meeting to request that change in appropriation.
So that means our budget will be $50,588,000? That's the question that I have.
That's a good question.
If we add money to the budget, it has to be reflected on the bottom line, because you've readjusted
Okay.
your FY15 budget.
I agree with you 100%. I just want to make sure that is the case.
If you add money
fact-
back into
You know,
the bu-
in
how
fact,
can
I
you
think
not
it's going to be
change it?
more than that, Nick, because the special town meeting is going to request one.
The 140 doesn't count.
140,
That doesn't
350.
count.
Right.
Because that's bills.
The extension of the fall town meeting is going to request 588,751 as a projected shortfall for FY15, and looks like 141,140. I'm sorry.
No.
143,340 for the overrun of FY14 expenses that came into the FY15 and got paid with FY15 money.
That's different from
Right.
the,
So the total problem that we have, the projected problem we have in FY15 is the 588,751 plus 143,340.
I disagree. I think the 143,340 doesn't go back in your number, doesn't go back into your number. It doesn't. Not as a budget, not as a total value that the school district is getting as monies from the town. Okay, that's a past bill issue.
The problem is that it's been expended out of the current year's budget. And so when you talk about what the expected shortfall is in FY15, part of it comes from the overrun of FY14 bills into FY15, and part of it comes from kind of the more organic deficit in FY15. But again, as we discussed, that deficit in FY15 that's native only to 15 is largely due to the fact that we got a 1.5% increase instead of a 3% increase. And that was done for a reason. It wasn't accidental, and it wasn't an attack on the school budget. It was because there were expected utility savings that we aren't realizing.
So we pulled out $723,000 out of the budget, and I just did the calculation, and we need to put back in $731,000. Is a shocker. No, but there were other reductions that
There
we had.
were other reductions,
Okay, significant other reductions.
$437,000 worth of reductions, including the coordinator positions, which
Right.
we are going to have to discuss as part of the FY16
Right.
budget process. But for FY15, yeah, I think you've got that about right.
7:31.
I think it's really, that last point was something I was trying to come back to. I think that that's really important to stay on top of that, because of my understanding, these were one-time changes, including, and one that I have concern about is the substitute situation, too.
Some of these one-time savings, we're going to have to talk about, do they need to be extended? I mean, if we have left a position vacant, then, and we get along with it okay this year, then maybe we have to discuss as we build the FY16 budget, is that a position we can continue to leave vacant? If the decision is made that we can't leave it vacant, then the next question is, well, where's the money going to come from? There's going to be a lot of work to build this FY16 budget.
Yes.
Right?
I have ideas.
But our original plan, okay, the original plan that we had all of that in there. Okay? The original plan, the preliminary FY16, 17, we put a number together. We have,
Yeah.
I don't know, go pull it out, but we have a preliminary plan that we put together for the next, 4 or 5 years as part of the kindergarten discussion. So we had a plan, and in that plan, there was those numbers. What I'm saying, is my whole point is, if our budget, and that was based on a budget of $50 million. If our budget now is $50,731,000, that gives us additional percentage increase following years, okay, perpetually. So that can help us mitigate the problem.
But I think one thing that we may find out in doing the FY16 budget is taking a zero-based approach. When we look into our line items, a lot of our line
Yeah.
items were under-encumbered.
Right.
So that $50 million budget perhaps was not enough to run our schools for this year. So when we do it from the ground up, we may find that number is 52 million, or 5150, or 55 million, but that'll throw off your percentages piece in
Yep.
terms of what we've already projected.
Again, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but we're going to have to talk about it a lot more as we go forward. Yeah, as we build this FY16 budget, the first answer is probably going to be one that nobody wants to hear. And then we're going to have to take that number and go forward with it, and there's going to have to be discussions with the town manager, with the Board of Selectmen, with the Finance Committee about priorities, about about what kind of services we want to be able to deliver, and what kind of services we can afford to deliver as a town.
So I think that when we get into doing the FY16 budget, that we want to take a look at the trend analysis that was done with the auditor in terms of what, on the line items as to what the actual numbers were that were spent in comparison, not in comparison to what we budgeted, but what was spent. What did we actually spend in all those line items? And when we put those down, we can see how that is affected and whether or not we have some unseen percentage increase, depends on the line item, that we may have to add to that. Because we will have to justify, if we come in at a budget that's above, or considerably above, what the town manager may give us, or has projected to give us, we have to justify every single one of those lines as to where it goes and why. And it's just not an arbitrary, we thought we'd like to increase it 3% or 2% or 5%. Because those are sometimes what has happened way in the past, when we were coming forward with a needs budget based upon, we saw a trend when you plotted it on a graph, that years ago prior to the town manager, our budget, we had to fight just to get the 3% increase, even though the trend showed that we were supposed to get 3 to 5% because of the way that the budget was growing. But that wasn't because we were not accountable for the raises and all the other stuff. It's just that was the number. So as we got less and less, that's why our budget has seen less staffing and more efficiencies within it, and that's why we have more payroll than almost anything else in the budget, except SPED, in that because we've been given less and less money, you cut textbooks, you cut technology, you cut whatever it is that you classroom supplies, there's all kinds of things along those lines. We certainly don't turn the heat off and make the kids sit there in blankets. So we know that that's something that we have to take into consideration. So if we can build it based upon those two things, and then making sure that we do follow our policies that we have. We can get into that discussion later after we talk about some other stuff. But, I mean, there are specific things in there to make sure, or to ensure, that, that we follow. And so, as we're going forward with this FY15 budget, and we want to make sure that on a quarterly basis that we are actually reviewing it, and if any of the line items are being transferred or changed, we have that list. And we make sure that we vote on it to make sure that those appropriated numbers, if they've been changed, they've had our approval to do so. So we've got to follow that piece that we didn't do before. We talked about having more information on special education. So we need to know the process that's followed there and to see whether or not they're just I don't think they're arbitrarily doing anything, but to ask the questions about when they do award services, how did they bill the services, how often does that happen? So we have even more of a handle on what's going on with SPED. I have a whole list of questions for SPED, but I'll wait till we have that discussion. But that's something that we have to fund. And so we want to make sure that we don't if we have a surprise, it's because someone moved into the system, or all of a sudden we have a behavior problem. It's not something that we created a problem because we didn't have a handle on what was going on. When we were down at the MASC conference, I found out just how many people I actually knew in all these other school committees. And I did ask them what their budget process was to see if there was anything that we could glean in the details of what it is that they did, or what they shouldn't do. And just so that you know, I've spoken to some of you, but I spoke to the president of MASBO and the executive director of MASBO, so that we would be able to have a little bit more of a handle there. And Mike had also spoken to the director of MASBO as far as coming forward, and made sure that he understood if we asked him for something, it was an analysis in terms of the process and the procedures that we have. It's not going in and trying to find out something that someone did wrong. It's what they would suggest if we're not doing it, what we should do. That doesn't mean that Frank can't give us that information also, and then we can see how it all lines up to make sure going forward that if they provide for certain checks and balances, we make sure that those are in there. So some of the things that were there as far as checks and balances in other school systems that we don't have in the current policies, and we certainly don't have them in the school committee policies, which now begs the question of more policies that you'll all like to deal with. But I mean, I got stuff in my head so that I got to put it on paper. However, in dealing with that, the checks and balances are within the business department itself, but it's also in terms of the superintendent. There are a number of districts that have the superintendent take a look and review the warrants so that that person is also aware of what all the bills are that we look at. It doesn't mean that he has the authority to pay the bills. It's that it's one more informational piece in the process going forward. And it's our authorization to pay bills, but the superintendent's signature has to be there, the business manager has to be there, and then if there's some other check that we want to have, that signature is there too. And when certain bills are put into Munis, or there's a chart of accounts and all of the other details, that's also signed off by a check with someone else that's within the department. So there's a lot of details to all of this stuff. You may be familiar with it because you've been a business manager for a long time, and you may make better suggestions. But these are some of the things, that I had seen. Now, I have other questions in terms of the details. Like, for instance, when I read through the fiscal policies, we have one on petty cash and how it's generated in the checks and balances on petty cash, because some things are paid with cash. I've had people come to me and say they sent checks in, but those checks haven't been deposited yet. So we need to find out that if people are actually paying bus fees, athletic fees, activity fees, that all of that is accounted for. Years ago, when I was on the PTO at McCarthy, what I would do, I would even take, you're not supposed to do this, but I would take pictures of the cash coming in to offset the people, and noting on the copies of these, this is before technology, that these are the people that paid, and here's the cash that came in, so that going into the business office, when I turned over the checks and the cash, I had accounted for every single thing that is there. And the same thing with the deposits in the athletic accounts when they're collecting fees at the gates. We need to make sure that there's more than one person counting money, and that it's all accounted for somehow or another, so that we make sure that that's all accurate. Because I think it leaves us open for an awful lot of questions and, some certain descriptors that we really don't want to go there. So there's a lot of things that I don't know that we have in place. Also, on the time clocks, I spoke to Frank about this in terms of, we thought we were putting a great program in place in terms of the time clock so that we could track the PSPs or anybody on hourly. But what has happened is that if they check in, let's say they work from 8 to 2, if they check in at 7:45 and they leave at 2:30, it's 7:45 to 2:30, so we got to get back in there and tighten up how we do some of those procedures too. So
The way that system works is pretty straightforward. That system basically says you log in the hours that the person actually is supposed to work. So if the person's supposed to work
I
from
underst-
8,
I
they
understand,
can
Nick.
punch in at 7 o'clock in the morning. They don't start getting paid until 8.
Well, that's
unless-
not how it works currently, because
telling
the
you.
stop was taken off of it.
I'm just telling you.
So we have to go
Let-
back and
let me
redo it.
finish. So if the person starts at 7, okay, and they're supposed to start at 8, the only individual that can override that is the supervisor. Their supervisor can go in the system and override it. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Well, how it may supposed to be is not how it currently is being implemented, so I had spoken to Frank about it, and he's looking into all of that too. But in terms of what I've found out about the process, I'm just sharing it with the rest of the committee so that we're all on the same page. And if there's other questions that it generates, then we can ask those questions. But it's interesting that as you go through policy and as you talk to other school committee members, it just generates more questions for the request for information as to how are we actually doing business. Not that I don't know how we're doing business, but the fine details of it. And it doesn't mean we're trying to micromanage. We're trying to get a handle on where we're at. So if the school committee sits down and works through the numbers on the line items so that we know where all the money is, then it's easily enough defensible when you have people in the community basically saying, well, it's a school committee budget. Well, then I guess we're going to really do the budget. In other words, it's not business as usual.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we had shared at this table last go-around in terms of where we are after our forensic audit. One of the things that Frank is doing, that John Sullivan will be doing, is looking at all of our procedures, obviously. Frank, this week, and we met with our principals today, diving into the salary piece of it, in terms of looking at exactly how that's calculated, make sure everybody's on their right step and degree and so forth. But also, too, is we're setting the stage for the FY16 budget process, and where salary is the majority of our budget. That's where Frank has turned his attention, and including our building administration well, for the next couple of days, going into next week.
I wanted to say that since I've been here, we have been depositing all monies that come into the business office on a weekly basis. If you know of any individuals, if you'd like to share the names with me privately, I'd be happy to check
Okay.
into that through the other accounts.
Al?
I don't mean to be rude, and some of the information's been good, but I'm not sure what the focus is, what we're doing right now.
I hope our presentation at town meeting is not as,
Well, okay, let's talk about that for a moment. The superintendent had a brief discussion with the town manager, I believe, yesterday or the day before about what the presentation would look like. Do you want to
Sure.
summarize?
And talking with Mr. Cohen just a few days ago, looking at exactly what role I play, what role the committee plays, and so forth. Essentially going into town meeting, the warrants are out. In terms of the presentation that Paul has put forward, I think he shared some of it at the selectmen's meeting. His thought, and this is for the discussion, that's the purpose we're here, is to talk about making some comments at the beginning of our warrant article. His impression was that Darlene would go through the special town meeting in terms of looking at the unpaid bills and so forth, and make that presentation. For us, thought either Mike or myself or the two of us put together something in terms of just sharing with the town meeting, but wasn't expecting a PowerPoint presentation or an overall large presentation. Took the information out to the town meeting reps and all the public meetings we've had.
Based upon some discussions that we've had Is council coming?
Yes, I've confirmed today that Andy will not be available, but one of his associates will be with us.
Good.
And we'll catch him up to speed.
So my thoughts, if we're going to make comments, would be brief comments. We can always answer questions later, but I think the
There's questions and answers
right.
session.
I think the simplest thing to
they're gonna
do
ask questions anyway.
is simply to run through the genesis of the number that we're ultimately asking for, and that means identifying what part of it is related to an overrun for FY14, what part of it is related to a deficit for FY15, and maybe a couple of words about where those deficits came from. Are there other ideas, other suggestions about things? I mean, I think Evelyn touches on some important points as we move forward into FY16, but I don't think necessarily those are topics of discussion at town meeting.
Not at this time.
Unless somebody wants to ask about what the plan is going forward, but rather than putting it out there, if people aren't interested in it, they can always, they can watch this meeting, they can come to other school committee meetings. It is something we're going to be working on. But yeah, I think no PowerPoint, no slides, just a.
Well, we need to have something up there in terms of numbers as to where we're going. Is the town manager going to put up numbers and what they mean? Verbally, you can't do it verbally.
Well, you saw the presentation at the Board of Selectmen's meeting where he has a breakdown. He has a single number for what the school, what would, he's got one number, it's 1.108, I think, that they're asking for in free cash. It's
broken-
And he
it's
breaks
broken up
that
in
number
three
down into
different-
the schools, into safety, into the various things. So to break down that 729 or whatever it is, that the schools are asking for, my only thought is to just point out that we get to that number with the 140, 340 out of the FY14 overrun after we take out the revolving fund amount, and that there's another 588, 751 of a projected deficit of FY15. And that's where that number comes from, just to give people an understanding of where the problems are.
Right, but if you have one slide up that makes up what it is we are asking
Yes.
for, so that it's better if you have a visual up there rather than throw the numbers out, because people, they may know what the numbers are. I mean, when I taught school, I taught also the obvious. I didn't just assume that my students knew the information or that they had previous knowledge of it. I assumed they knew nothing, and if they said, oh, we understand that, you move on. But I think that you have to have something that is visual, that is up there in terms of your breakdown and what it means.
Because really, the school committee is coming to town meeting asking for the money. Right? The school committee is coming
Right.
to town meeting asking for the money.
And we were not being prohibited, but in terms of April town meeting, when we
So-
come with a 15 PowerPoint slide,
Right.
that was
You
not the
re-
expectation.
No, we're not going to do a
No,
15.
I'm not asking for 15
Do
pages.
you recall the slide that we were provided, I believe, at our last
Actually, I mean,
regularly scheduled
Yes.
meeting? I think Frank put it together. It kind of showed the revenues and would
Right.
that, do you think that would be appropriate?
Yep.
Because we also need to identify.
We'll make sure that's available. We can run some copies and have them at the table in the front, as well as put it up on the screen.
As long as there is an understanding, a breakdown and understanding of where these monies, 16, 15, 14.
Right. Right, nothing about 16, actually, but I hear what you're saying, yeah.
Because the other piece, people will say, because people are, not everyone follows us as if we're some kind of a,
Groupie?
yes, yeah, we don't have groupies. So, you don't have everybody following us
don't.
like that. Well, I don't know about that.
Sure,
but- Anyway, the piece is, the point that I want to make is that those that may
she has
be-
this whole Bob the Builder crowd cheering her on, so just get that in your head.
you want to make sure that it's clear as to where the monies come from. There will be questions, did you drain all of your revolving accounts? All right, and we want to make sure that we understand and identify what that is. And then whatever we had as the budget freeze and the loss of the positions and the fact that that has been taken out of the budget. I mean, people are going to ask the same questions again. And we want to make sure that if it's up there, we can point to it and identify it that way. As we know, in terms of what we do, in terms of educating students and informing them, you want to be able to point to something. It's easier than trying to continually explain it, because somebody may not be listening.
No, it's a good
They're
point.
talking
And
to
the
their
two of you
person
need
next
to be
to
up
it.
Yeah.
The two of you need to be up there. Obviously, Dr. Piano, but yourself as a, remember, I'm going to say it again, the school committee is asking for the money.
Right.
Okay, the superintendent does not ask for the money. We have to ask for the money. It's our responsibility.
I think that's right. It's our
It's our responsibility. So we have to ask him, but he needs to be there to support any information that because there's going to be questions. And there's going to be some questions, we already know this, there's going to be some questions that we're going to tell people.
Right.
So
We-
should we have
The hand's going to go
Frank
up.
there also
Frank? Oh, yeah.
at town meeting? When we've done any budget requests, whether it's whatever it was, we
They're a
always
fun
had
group,
the
they really are.
business manager there.
They're quite entertaining.
That way, if there's other specific
Probably not as much
questions.
fun as Bill Ricca, but fun.
I don't know.
You don't wear anything green. That's what I have to tell you. Maroon, excellent. There you go. There you go.
Okay, so
I-
we've established that we want to have at least one or two slides, simple. Remember, we talked about simple. Because that one, if we do the one slide that we had at our last meeting, that's a lot of numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to just have the simple breakdown and then the thing that goes into more detail, don't we?
Simple.
The simple breakdown is the 588 for the FY
Right.
Yeah.
15 budget and the 14340 from the FY 14 budget. That's a simple set. We see if people have questions, you can put the other slide up in order to explain it.
Do we want to, I'm just asking this question now, do we want to give some kind of brief explanation on the specific overruns and what areas they were? Because not every, some folks follow really well and understand what's going on, but then there's going to be other folks at town meeting that have really no idea what's going on, and we didn't have a true pre-town meeting.
Well, you've seen the spreadsheet from the auditor, right?
Right.
And I think, and
if
we
you
all-
want to throw up those big pages,
we
that's
all-
great. But
Right, we all agree, I think that's probably,
It's a little
that'd be
overkill.
difficult to
It's-
navigate.
It's too much, there's too many numbers. I think highlighting the areas that we overran, and with possibly a basic explanation on why they overran those areas.
So say pick the three largest overruns.
Actually, if you took the three, the three that I'm thinking of, you're probably going to encompass 90% of the number. Am I right? There's like three major areas.
I think that there should be a brief summary
Right.
of the expenses. We've already provided an analysis, which everyone
Right.
has seen at the last meeting. I
That-
don't
that
believe
would work
Mr.
good.
Thomas
That's the one
received
on-
that yet, but that's the one you're referring to.
Is referring to, right.
It's-
Right.
It's
that
pretty
would be
clean.
fine. Yep. And then just a basic explanation of that 580 number. Because if I wasn't involved and I was just going to be up there and someone was asking me to vote, I want to know what encompasses that 580 and why.
Would you have Frank explain what all the numbers are?
No, I think it's about time we knew what the numbers were.
No, I'm just
And I
asking.
think
I
we're
didn't
gonna,
say
we're
that we
gonna have to
didn't know.
demonstrate that. I think the question about the FY 15, since we know that the budgeting wasn't really good, I'm a little fuzzy on exactly what we want to say about that, right? I mean, you can just take the numbers that were put out there when we originally submitted the budget for approval by town meeting, and compare where we are now, and look at where the overruns are. But we know that those numbers that got put out weren't very good.
In 14 or 15?
No,
The
15, because they were
15,
based on
but
FY
they were
that's
lousy
why-
projections.
But that's
Do you
why
s-
we're making the adjustment
Right.
now. That's
Right,
that's the
but
whole
that
point.
doesn't mean that there, well, I hate to say this publicly, that doesn't mean that there won't be other adjustments,
Well,
because we
that's-
don't know on some of those lines exactly what the impact will be.
No.
But we're gonna monitor what
But we're
those
going to
are.
manage them, and we're going to make sure
Right.
that they're
Right.
not overrun.
So we can talk about, I think, where the biggest misses were in FY 14
which is the reason
Reasonably.
why the budget's
Right.
off on 15
Right.
for those same items. I mean, come on, it's obvious. But you also got to take a heavy look at the utility. The utility thing is a big nut.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a
that's
big
gonna-
nut in
That'll
our-
be by
in-
far the biggest miss
Right.
in the FY15 budget. I mean, and again, these are projected expenses by year end. Okay. Maybe we can do that.
You have to explain to the poor folks that are not groupies. Okay? I mean, there's people that are genuinely, they'll watch school committee meetings, they'll watch Board of Selectmen meetings, they'll watch finance committee meetings, the tri-board meetings. They'll know, they'll understand, they won't understand as well, but they'll know what's going on. But then there's probably a good chunk of, town meeting reps that don't follow it that closely, and they're gonna wanna know a little bit more detail,
Right.
You know what I mean? They're just
No, it's
human
it's
nature.
a
I
very
mean,
good
come on.
point.
So would you like us to start to draft a summary and put together a couple of slides?
Yeah, like,
And
it can't be
I
more
mean,
than
even-
two slides. or
I mean,
two-
even
two
in
or three
looking at the
slides.
auditor's notes and so forth, I mean, some nice paragraphs there that you could pull out, even if they have this information, and to highlight. And you can anticipate some of the questions and try to put it out there, but.
Yeah, that would be the other thing, is we could have one or two slides, we could have a slightly thicker handout as people come in the door, if you want to do, if we want to put some of the auditors' report on top of, if we print out the if we're going to do two slides, one to explain just kind of an overview of the numbers, and another.
I think that.
Am I losing you?
Yeah,
No,
you're just
no,
going
you're not
way
losing
too
me at
far.
all. Is the auditor's report
complete.
complete?
It's not complete. Why hand out something that's not complete?
I think that once it's complete, that we put it on the cover page of our
It won't be
website.
Yes, I agree
I
with
know it
that,
won't be
but it
complete
won't
for
be
the meeting.
complete by Monday.
I know that.
No, we knew that, but we do
So
have
what- okay,
preliminary
so-
information. We share what the
Yeah.
preliminary information was he shared at the joint meeting, but not in such detail.
One.
I agree.
There's one.
That's one.
This is one
Two,
document.
two is a couple of charts
breakdown.
that show where we missed in FY14 and where we're projecting overruns in FY15.
Correct.
Right? Anything else?
Right, because we've got a trend analysis
And then
on
you can
those
talk about 'em.
lines.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you can talk about them from there. I mean,
together.
that's, and could you have supporting data behind that anyway?
Right.
Right, because again, the trend analysis of those lines, because the auditor went back more than 1 year, you can see where the numbers went. And they may ask, be prepared just in case.
This is something I don't really want to say publicly, but I'm not sure how reliable those trends are.
Are those actual numbers that was in an end-of-year
Well,
report?
They are.
And it's cast in
But-
stone.
Well, it may be cast
It
in
may not
stone,
be
but
real
it may not
numbers?
be real.
Real
If, what Mr. Brooks was telling us was that the cost of services in FY13 was significantly higher than what was recorded there. That it was more like, he said it at the last school committee meeting, that rather than going from 100,000 to 850,000, it was more like 800,000 in FY13, and that those expenses have been misclassified.
Right, but that didn't impact the bottom.
I'm just,
bottom
that didn't-
line.
no, it doesn't impact
Right.
the bottom line at all, but it makes a trend analysis unreliable.
Right.
You're saying that anything that we want to take as a trend, on any of the line items, we can't? I mean, if one line or
I
two
haven't
lines.
said it yet.
No,
I
but we,
mean, I don't know what to say about that.
But I think looking at trend information at that meeting may be, I don't know, I won't use the word skewed, but I don't know what would be the purpose. I think the purpose.
Did we ask if there was any potential questions that we might want to troubleshoot? We would have to have information to answer those questions, so it wouldn't look like we don't know what we're doing, or that we don't have the information available, or we'll get it to you type of thing. Don't we want to try to anticipate some questions to make sure we have information? If we have the information, I mean, you're just pulling it off spreadsheets or Munis in terms of what was happened in the past, or the auditor's report. I'm not trying to have somebody do a lot of work. I'm just trying to make sure that if you stand up and somebody asks you a question, you can't say, "I don't know." You gotta have something that you can have, it's all numbers, something concrete. Whether they're real or imagined, there's numbers down on a piece of paper that we're supposed to be working
Well,
with.
you're right, and we can have any document, I mean, we can bring the whole darn report with us and be able to answer a specific question and a specific number, but to determine in advance all the questions that people are gonna ask is
No,
gonna
you
be.
can't determine all
I
of
could-
them,
I
but
could show
you
up
can
with
make sure that
binders
you-
worth of stuff, I mean.
You can make sure that you show up with enough information that if you wanna, if somebody asks a question, you can say, just a minute, the auditor's report has that information, let me get whatever the line items are or whatever the numbers are, and point to, we have the audit report, we have what Frank's working on, we have all kinds of stuff that's out there. We just wanna make sure that we're as open as possible about all the information that we have. Because the question may come up is, well, what are you gonna do to the FY16 budget so that you don't get in the same mess? That's why I'm putting forward some
Well,
proposals
I think
on that.
when that question comes, then, yeah, I may ask you to address that, since you've got that list put together, and we can
That's what
add more
people
things to it.
agree, or at least
Yeah,
it's
I
something we're
think
going to examine.
These are-
One,
yeah,
one
these are
thing,
some of the-
one thing that's important is that if I and the superintendent are standing next to Paul during the presentation part, that in no way should inhibit anyone else from speaking.
No, I
Right?
understand.
Certainly
I'm sure
during.
that's gonna be a problem for you.
Certainly during the question and answer or the debate section, right? I mean, everybody has their own view of this, everybody has their own understanding of it, and it's gonna be important that we all get up there.
If you want us to all get
And-
up,
I
don't
think
have a problem.
We may
at
all
some,
sit up there.
at some point during the evening, I think we all ought
no,
to
but they're
stand
gonna go up
up
to the
there at
podium,
some
and I'm
point.
saying that
I
we
just
could
don't want
go
to
up
be in the
there.
line of fire of the tomatoes.
I think we should
You sit behind
all
me,
I'll
sure.
st- I'll stand behind
personally
you, I'll
make
take
a
care of it.
request
There'll
at
probably
some
be an
point during
improvement for
the
me.
debate section.
Mike, I just
Yeah.
asked just a clarifying question. In terms of the list Evelyn has, those proposed
Yep.
ways for us to work on our budget for next year. And those are, we've not had that from Mr. Sullivan or Mr.
No, that's
Antonelli.
right.
So these are just brainstormed ideas.
correct.
Okay.
This is not, and
All right.
it would be stated as such.
Right.
These are and where I got the.
Well, one of the things that we're going to do is follow the recommendations of the professionals that we bring in.
Right.
And we'll
also,
find out what they are.
MASBO will come in and give us a
Exactly.
setup there.
I'm just curious if it would be premature to talk about specifics before we've actually gone through that exercise.
I think what you can say is that based on experience down at the Cape, based on discussions with other people, these are the sorts of things that have been proposed.
Right, I didn't make
These
them
are-
up.
While,
Oh, no, I'm
while
not
they-
saying that
while
you-
it's not an
yeah.
exclusive list or a restrictive list, if people want to know what are we thinking about,
Sure.
we're thinking about those things.
have to be
And
considered.
they, and if this is the only engagement with the budget process that they have this year, they should expect to see behavior like that at the end of the year, when we do the presentation. I mean, they should expect to have heard about public input sessions. They should expect to have heard about line item analysis.
I'm just asking
Yeah,
for
yeah.
clarification in terms of what we're talking about.
Right, well, it's up for discussion, we've had no votes, and we haven't gone forward with any kind of an action plan in terms of how we're going to direct or to involve ourselves in the FY16 budget process. All I know is it's got to be different than what we've done in the past, and then the implementation and the check and balance from us has to follow what's in these policies. And I don't know when you want to have a discussion on what I gave you, if you want to have any.
Not before Monday.
Well, I mean, I brought some of those up.
As an added note, I think you as the chair, need to be prepared to, as part of your, I'll use the word preliminary statement, that there will be no personnel discussions whatsoever at town meeting.
You know what?
Have to say it.
That's a good.
Council has told us.
Right. And if people want to, ask questions about it, they can ask questions
They
of
can ask 'em,
council
but-
during the
Right.
question and answer session.
And you know what the council's gonna say. I can't discuss that.
I know what the council's going to say. There may be people who still want to ask.
That's fine, yeah, they're allowed to ask.
But I think that one of the things, not that I follow social media a lot, because Facebook likes to kick me off within 3 minutes. There must be a reason for that.
Kick you
But
off?
yeah, it goes white, the screen goes white, and then it ends.
Don't.
Don't even go there. I mean, there's other things I'm sure I'm not doing correctly. But what I wanted to say is there's a lot of discussion that's out there. There's a lot of speculation. The school committee has asked a lot of questions. We've got a lot of information, but we need to have that information complete. We want the public to know that we need, and that may be something you say Monday night in a preliminary statement, that we need to make sure that everything that we're asking has been checked and double-checked to make sure that whatever information that we share with the community is accurate. And because we don't want to speculate. We want to do all of the looking into every single aspect of things, but a lot of things can't be shared. So a lot of the questions that are being asked in the public, we're doing those 8 questions, but it takes us longer because we want to make sure that we got the right information going forward to the public. So there's a lot of stuff we are asking. We just want to make sure it's all right.
Yeah.
I think I said that
And
5
again,
different times.
In terms of personnel matters, we're not going.
No, we can't say anything about personnel matters.
Are you a little happier with where we are now?
Yeah.
Because I think that was a valid question.
I think if there's an opportunity to speak with the moderator before the meeting, yeah. I think some general comments about decorum probably are appropriate because there's a lot of emotion involved in this situation. I think he has to be really on his toes to intervene when somebody goes off on a tirade, because there was a town meeting somewhere that was trying to do away with the sale of cigarettes, and he had to,
Yeah.
had to
Yes,
cancel the
Westminster.
meeting. I don't think that would happen in Chelmsford, but I think that we could have a brief impassioned exchange of ideas. So I think if he makes some general comments and is ready to intervene, that we can get past that in a hurry, I think.
Yeah, I will say the moderator reached out to me today. We traded a couple of emails. I think he's acutely aware of
I'm sure he is.
the potential situation, and yeah, like I'm sure he's not sleeping any easier because of that cigarette
He'll do fine.
discussion. But
They
yeah,
did
I
have
think
police escorts out.
he's
so.
ready. I think he's ready for it, and we wanna let people ask questions and get answers in a respectful way, and we'll be there to answer all the questions. But
We haven't had a similar type of situation for a while. That's the only reason I bring it up.
Yeah.
I mean, the group is good. I think, personal political statement, I think since 1989, the town meeting's been very responsible because they have to be, or they can't, if they don't show up, they can't stay on.
Right.
And you have to listen to all the arguments. You can't just show up and load the meeting and all of those kinds of things. So I'm sure that it'll be fine, but it's just good to bring things up.
yep.
It's interesting when you bring up 1989. In all those years since that point in time, I have never seen anything like this in terms of the town or the schools or any other budgets, except when we started spending down all the stabilization fund to fix problems. But nothing ever has come up like this. So it's not as if it's a trend, and I don't want it to be a trend. It's a single point. The other thing is that there has been also different postings as far as the Powers and Sullivan audit report, and just so the general public knows, we've read all of that and we understand the implications and the impact that that has to how we do business. So we don't have our heads in the sand. We're reading all of the reports and analyzing all of the different things and making sure that we pay attention to what's going on there, and that if there are suggestions to be made, we're addressing them. So some of the findings that they had, I think you've addressed some of the findings in terms of the payroll piece. Are there any other ones that, when you saw that you've dealt with?
Well, just today, we had a meeting with the principals, the high school principal and the 2 middle school principals, and we reviewed procedures. I reviewed procedures with them for the student activity accounts and reconciling them on a monthly basis. Just before this meeting, I emailed them a spreadsheet explaining how that should take place, and that the first one should take place as of October 31st, and that reconciliation will be signed by the principal, the business manager, the superintendent, and then it will be included in the school committee packages on a monthly basis. So that's one of the audit recommendations that we're getting right on.
That's a big one.
Well, I think I was speaking to you once when you were doing some corrections as far as the payroll piece goes also.
Yes, we work on that every time there is a payroll. And speaking of payroll, there is a payroll on my desk right now that needs to be signed, so I just want to bring that up to the school committee, and I have made some notes on the side for reviewing that particular payroll.
So one of the other things, since you don't want to obviously get into a policy discussion, just so, again, that the general public knows that I did pull and gave everybody some of the fiscal management budget policies that's in the 4,000 series, and they're all online if anybody wants to read them. One of the things we thought of doing was to have more than one type of public hearing, and so where it says a or the public hearing, we'll change all that around, and then we'll take a look at if we want to deal with what training a business manager has in Munis, or if that's where we're going with that, we'll put that in a policy. And
Well,
there's a few other pieces that's there.
I don't think you want to put, I mean, we talked about training, and I think where that really should go is either go with the goals and objectives and/or the personnel files of each individual to put otherwise you could be changing the policy every year, because it could be different training every year, because everyone is individual.
Right.
Someone may require certain training. Someone may come in with the experience that Frank has on Munis. Doesn't require going through full Munis training, and I
Shouldn't
mean,
that be
individual
part of
basis.
part of a job requirement?
Correct.
Well,
Yeah,
Well, it's not
so in the
necessar-
job
it's-
description rather than in the policy,
Nope.
you're saying?
But going forward, we won't consider a candidate unless.
Well, yes, but you also may have situations where, for example, like we have the new Chrono system,
Yes.
where we require the payroll person, the assistant accountant, the business manager to go to Chronos and get additional training required. In other words, this is additional beyond minimum job requirements.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And that's great,
Certifications,
but we
whatever.
need to follow through with that.
Oh, yeah.
and supply the training
Oh,
to
yeah.
people who are actually going to use that.
Well, like-
It wasn't supplied until they requested it.
I understand, but I guess the point is that when we have professional days for our teaching staff, it works the same way for the administration. So,
And like I said, there's other stuff, but we don't need to go through all of that currently in terms of where we go, but it may be something that becomes part of policy, because I did go through and talk about it, and maybe that's something, since we have a meeting on the 18th, depending upon the outcome on the 17th, maybe as policy, we'll just put it up and have a discussion on these few policies to see if there's any different changes we want to make in them. Is that all right, if you put that on your agenda for Tuesday? Or, I mean, it's a
Well,
regular agenda.
Policy is standing, but I guess my recommendation would be you submit the changes to the policy subcommittee, and let them bring them forward. We do also have a spot for a discussion of the MASC conference, so that might also be an appropriate place to talk about some of the things that
We can go over it
People are
again, because
there,
we don't
yeah.
have any people are listening.
I mean, what I recommend we might want to do, because this is so critical, I think we probably want to review these first, and then we still have to wait for the recommendations that are
Right.
coming out of John Sullivan. So that can fold into this, and might make
That's
some
fine.
additional changes. Because I think reviewing it so we understand the basis of everything, I can be brutally honest with you, I didn't read through every single one of these.
do you want to discuss it then, or?
Could be a discussion, yeah. I mean, we can just look at them, talk about them, and because this is so critical, maybe it's not a subcommittee thing. Maybe it's just something we talk about.
I see what you're saying,
That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. We just talk about it a little bit. And
I
I'm not
think-
saying we make changes or vote on anything
Right.
until John makes it, and John and Frank make their recommendations.
Right.
I don't want to
Well,
be
true, and
premature,
also we
otherwise
don't
we're
know.
going to be doing it
if-
twice.
And then the same thing with MASBA, is if
Yeah.
there's certain things that's there that they
Right, yeah,
recommend that we
exactly.
have. And Frank hasn't looked at all of the policies to see if he would recommend any changes, because he's so busy with everything else,
Right.
which is what the process is that we've followed in the past.
All right, well, the point of the evening was to discuss the budget, with a particular eye on the presentation for Monday night. Do we feel like we've pretty much gone over what we want to go over there? Do we feel like that there's a pretty good understanding of what the presentation ought to look like? Basically 2 pages, one with a summary of the expenses and the revenues available, and the other with a brief breakdown of the major categories where we missed our FY14 budget and are
And I'm gonna-
projecting a miss in the FY15
I'm
budget.
going to request that if a word can be used that is in the normal use of the English language, we use it, rather than using words like encumbrance, because some people will never. We need to simplify this so it's very understandable.
What would you recommend instead of encumbrance?
That's an example, I don't know.
Well, what you
It's
could-
it's a good example because it's hard to replace.
Yeah.
The
we have
person,
to think
the
about it.
person that can answer that question is our consultant. Because I'm certainly sure somewhere on a test it asks, what is an encumbrance, and can you describe something, an example? So,
But any jargon we use,
Right.
we need to be able to define it, so that the
People
people in the
understand
audience
what
who
it is
don't
we're
do
talking
this
about.
for a living, understand what we're saying.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm just laughing because we don't do this for a living.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right. I think that's a good point.
I do have one quick question. And sorry, but I have to ask the question. Haven't been any more issues, have there? In your reviews over the last week, I mean, the last time we spoke was like a week ago.
no,
You
no
know,
surprises?
no surprises at this point?
No.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have to ask the question.
No, that's,
No, it's a good question to ask.
Because we haven't gotten together because we said we weren't gonna get together until after town meeting,
Right.
so just wanted to, you know.
all right. Do we need a meeting tomorrow night, or can we cancel it?
What would we discuss if we had it? Where would you go with that? Would you,
What it's posted for is budget discussion.
well, yeah, but that covers a lot of territory.
It
Is there
does
anything-
cover a lot of territory. I think.
I'm
you
not
have-
available.
You have a
so.
conflicting appointment.
And I don't think
It's-
we're not gonna be able to add anything to,
Yeah, it was, I scheduled it when.
Just in case.
A week ago, when it was
Well-
less clear exactly what we were gonna need to talk about and how long the discussion was gonna take. If everybody's comfortable with it, my inclination is to cancel it. I feel like we had a good discussion tonight.
Is there anything that you need to add or to inform us of anything else that's going on, or
No,
any process, anything? Okay.
no, nothing that can't wait until your next scheduled school committee meeting.
Okay, well, then I will work with Debbie to cancel tomorrow night's meeting.
Okay.
And the time being 8:49, I would, unless there is something else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.